Have you ever felt like you're living inside a script that was written long before you arrived, where every action, every choice, even your emotions don't fully feel like your own, as if some invisible hand is moving the pieces, and you're just a small pawn in a much bigger game you didn't even know you were a part of? Life, when you really think about it, is a lot like a chessboard. But here's the truth most people miss. Many of us step onto that board unconsciously. We move, we react, we make decisions not from true freedom, but from fear-based patterns, invisible habits and beliefs programmed into us since childhood. We learn to avoid risk more than we learn to chase our dreams. We get swept into games that aren't ours. Family expectations, societal pressure, definitions of success that were never truly ours to begin with. And somewhere along the way, we forget to step back and ask, whose game am I playing and why? In this game of life, not everyone is a player. Many are simply pawns, moving exactly how the system wants them to. They take on a job because it's safe, settle into a relationship because it's time, follow social norms, because that's what everyone does. But the most dangerous part isn't living like a pawn. It's not realizing you're on the board at all. Because when you don't know you're in the game, you can't win. You don't know the rules, you don't know the strategies. Most importantly, you don't know that you have a choice. You live like life is something happening to you, not something you are creating. It's like being carried by a river without realizing you're drifting. You react instead of responding. You feel constantly busy but rarely truly alive. Each day looks like the last wake-up work, eat, sleep on repeat. And somewhere in your head, a quiet voice whispers, "Is this it?" But you ignore it. You keep swimming because everyone else is doing the same. But there will come a moment, if you're lucky or if you're brave enough to pause, when you start to see the moves that have been playing you, you realize that your fear of failure has kept you from pursuing what you truly want, that your lack of confidence wasn't something you were born with. It was built by criticism, comparison, and past wounds. You see that you've been living as a pawn in someone else's strategy instead of stepping into your own. And it's in that moment, the moment of awareness, that something miraculous begins to unfold. You're no longer just being moved, you start to move. You're no longer living by default. You begin to live with intention. You start to view yourself as the main character, not perfect, but empowered, able to adjust, able to step back and see the whole board instead of just the square right in front of you. When you learn to observe yourself as a part of life's game, not with judgment, but with mindfulness, you realize something powerful. The game isn't just about winning, it's about learning. Every wrong move is a lesson. Every time you're in check is a chance to pause and redirect. And the best part, you're not locked into one role. You may feel like a pawn today, but with enough awareness, you can become the player. No one can stop you from changing your position except you. That's why awareness is the first real move in the game of life. When you're awake, you start to notice the patterns. When you notice the patterns, you can break them. And when you break them, you can begin crafting a new way of living, not from fear or expectation, but from truth and desire that come from deep within. And in the end, what matters isn't where you are on the board, it's whether you know you're playing. Are you choosing your next move with clarity or just reacting on autopilot? Are you playing your own game or are you still lost in someone else's? The game is still going day by day, choice by choice, and only when you truly open your eyes will you begin to see it clearly. You are not just a piece, you are the player. And once you realize that you can change the whole game, there's a truth often forgotten in the rush of daily life. You are the king in the chessboard of your own life, but not the flashy, loud, sword-wielding king charging across the battlefield. No, your role is more subtle, more grounded. A steady figure who moves little but whose presence determines everything. Because in any game of chess, no matter how fiercely the other pieces fight, if the king falls, the game is over. Your life is no different. You may have talents, relationships, success, but if you lose yourself, if your core is swept away by panic pressure or the noise of the crowd, then none of those external things matter. At the core, it's not about being faster, stronger, or louder. It's about staying rooted amidst the storm. It's about keeping your inner clarity when everything around you is in chaos. The king doesn't move much because every move matters. Each action is a result of patience, observation, and understanding the full picture. The king doesn't need to be the fastest on the board. The king simply needs to know where they are and what's really going on. In life, many people confuse constant motion with progress. They jump from job to job, stay endlessly busy, chase multiple goals at once, but deep down they don't really know why they're doing it. They're like pieces pushed around by the momentum of the board, not moved by choice. But the king is different. The king moves only when necessary. Every move has weight, every decision has depth, no rushing, no reacting to the crowd. So what is the true power of a king? It's not in power, it's not in fame, it's in self-knowledge. When you truly know who you are, you don't need to prove it to anyone. You aren't swayed by shallow praise or empty criticism. You don't get pulled into games that aren't yours to play. You become grounded not because storms don't come, but because you've learned how to anchor within. And when you keep that inner king alive, when you hold on to your clarity, your presence, your dignity, in a chaotic world, you don't just survive, you lead. You become the still point in the storm, the calm center in a chaotic board. But living like a king doesn't mean avoiding challenges. On the contrary, the king stands in the heart of the storm, always facing truth. But unlike other pieces, the king doesn't react, the king responds, not with haste, not with blind defense, but with calm observation and deliberate action. That's composure, that's true power. And here's something vital, living like a king isn't about pride or detachment from others. It's about knowing your place, not the center of the world, but the center of yourself. From that place, you see more clearly, not to control, but to understand, not to dominate, but to sustain balance within and without. Imagine this, a chessboard in the middle of a desert, pieces flying dust everywhere, noise and chaos all around. And in the center, still quiet, unwavering. There is you, not because you are untouched, but because you chose not to be carried away. You stayed with yourself, and sometimes that alone is a victory. Survival doesn't mean hiding or shrinking. It means holding on to what's real when everything demands you to change. It means not losing the essential, even when you have to let go of the temporary. It means remembering you don't have to win every battle. Just don't surrender your king. And if there's one reminder to carry with you, let it be this: you don't have to become extraordinary. You only have to become someone who understands the value of staying awake, staying true, and staying centered. Live like a king, not for the crown, but because you know you are the cornerstone of the entire board. And if the king still stands, the game is still alive. Not as a battle, but as a meaningful journey. In today's noisy world where everyone seems to be racing to be the first, the best, or the most recognized, the act of slowing down, staying quiet and turning inward can feel almost rebellious. But that's exactly where every meaningful strategy begins. Because you can't control the board if you don't understand what's going on in your own mind. You can't make wise decisions if your thoughts are constantly scattered by the noise outside social media headlines, success pressure, or the judgment of others. These things aren't the enemy, but if you don't know how to return to your inner world, you'll end up being led by them without even realizing it. A real strategy doesn't begin with a plan or a map. It begins with silence. In the stillness, you begin to hear your true voice, not the echo of social expectations, not recycled phrases from other people, but the voice of your own intuition and deep wisdom. It doesn't shout, it doesn't show off, but it's clear like a stream of groundwater, running beneath the surface, invisible to the eye, yet capable of feeding an entire forest. When you train yourself to sit with yourself, not doing, not reacting, not trying to prove anything, you develop the ability to see the true motivations behind your choices, to recognize which emotions are pushing you forward, and whether they come from fullness or from fear. Real strategy doesn't begin with, how can I win, but with, where am I playing from love or fear? In silence, you learn the art of not moving. A skill that sounds simple, but is actually the mark of someone who has moved beyond the surface of life. Anyone can act when they're encouraged to. But only those with real inner strength can choose not to act, even when everything around them is screaming, do something, join in, prove yourself. Knowing when not to move is a kind of wisdom. Just like in chess, not every situation calls for an attack. Sometimes holding your position, watching, adjusting, waiting is the strongest move. And in life, that's even more true. When you're unsure of your direction, you're more vulnerable to seductive invitations. Fame, quick success outside approval. You trade the truth inside you for a moment of applause. But that trade always comes at a steep price. You lose your direction. That's why turning inward isn't just a spiritual practice, it's a strategic foundation. A person may not have all the answers, but they have stillness and clarity. They'll move forward with stability. While others rush, they stand. While others shout, they remain quiet. But every word they speak, every step they take carries weight and roots. That's the kind of power you can't imitate. True strategy isn't about conquering the world. It's about not losing yourself in the world. It's not about proving you're right. It's about living in a way that feels true. And it doesn't come from temporary cleverness. It comes from depth forged in silence, in failure, in the quiet hours spent sitting with yourself, in the long nights, in the unseen moments, and then when the time to act finally comes, you'll know. Not because someone told you, not because you should, but because something inside you has become undeniably clear, like still water that knows exactly when to flow, like the sun that knows exactly when to rise. Action then comes not from impulse, not from confusion, but as a natural response, effortless, directed, true. That's when you are truly strategic. That's when you begin to play your own game of life, not from the need to be seen, but from the depth of someone who has already seen enough. Self-betrayal, it sounds like something big, dramatic, something that happens in defining moments. But in truth, it happens every single day in the smallest of choices. It happens when you say yes while your heart is screaming no. When you stay silent to keep the peace, even though the truth is being twisted. When you smile politely just to avoid being seen as difficult. These may seem harmless, but each time you're taking a step away from yourself. And with each step, you quietly place the king within you, in check, a threat not visible from the outside, but dangerously real. In the chess game of life, the enemy isn't always a clear external force. More often, it's you pushing yourself into a corner without even realizing it. Not because you're weak, but because you haven't yet found the courage to live in alignment with your deepest truths, your raw emotions, your uncompromising values. You tell yourself, it's fine, just let it go, keep things smooth. But the price of external harmony is often internal misalignment, and over time you stop hearing the voice of your own soul buried beneath the masks you've put on just to survive. Chasing approval is one of the easiest paths in life, paved with applause and admiring glances. But it's also the path that leads you farthest away from yourself. You stop living by your inner compass. and start spinning with the winds of public opinion. Every time you change yourself to match or someone else's expectations, you hand them the reins to your life. And it may look like you're moving forward, but you're actually just being moved on someone else's board. Self-betrayal isn't a sudden collapse. It's a quiet erosion, like water dripping on the rock of your self-respect, slowly but surely cracking it. And worse than being betrayed by someone else is the moment you can no longer trust yourself, when you can no longer hear your intuition, when you can no longer speak your truth, when you stop living from what once made you feel truly alive. And by then, even if your outer life looks perfect, a stable job, a beautiful relationship, a reputation, others admire on the inside, you're living in an empty castle. Because if you haven't built your inner fortress, no wall on the outside will protect you. You can craft the most polished image, convince the whole world that you're okay. But if inside you there's a child silently crying, angry, afraid, those walls will fall. Not because of some grand catastrophe, but from sheer exhaustion, the slow collapse of a soul that has played a role for far too long. So no, living authentically isn't just a moral suggestion, it's a survival strategy. Because if you don't stay loyal to yourself, you will always be reacting to the world instead of leading from within. You'll always live in a state of mental defense, constantly adjusting to your surroundings, rather than shaping those surroundings around the unshakable core of who you are. And then one day you'll look back and realize you've come a long way, but you have no idea where you are. The inner castle isn't built with success, spotlight, or praise. It's built with small, quiet, brutally honest choices. It's built when you speak the truth, even if it means being misunderstood, when you sit with your pain instead of covering it with fake joy, when you say no to the easy victory because it would cost you your essence. Each brick laid with the unshakable vow, I will not abandon myself even if no one else stands with me. And from that castle, from that quiet, steady place, you begin to see the board of your life more clearly. You're no longer governed by the fear of rejection or the need to be liked. You no longer require universal approval to feel valid. You only need one thing: not to betray yourself. Because if the king within you is still standing, not out of pride or dominance, but because you've kept your soul upright and whole, then there is still hope on the board. And in that moment, you're no longer playing just to survive. You're playing to lead. Self-knowledge isn't some distant, lofty concept reserved for monks on mountaintops. It's a survival skill, quiet but essential in a world that constantly invites you to live according to something outside of yourself. Because if you don't know who you are, you can't know what truly matters. And when that happens, you become easily convinced this is what you should chase, that person is who you should please. This path is what success looks like. And so you begin to trade pieces of yourself. First your time, then your energy, and eventually your integrity. You start selling off parts of who you are in exchange for things that seem appealing. Recognition, acceptance, the illusion of belonging. But here's the strange part. The more you accumulate, the emptier you feel, because deep down you know you're living a story you didn't write. Self-awareness is how you take back the pen to rewrite slowly the story of your life. And it begins with simple, powerful questions. What do I truly value? What makes me feel alive? What am I willing to sacrifice, and what is non-negotiable? When you're clear on your core values, you stop trading the essential for the superficial. You stop selling your soul for a few rounds of applause. You begin to tell the difference between the voice within and the noise of the crowd. And from there, your life strategy begins to take shape, not from a fear of being left behind, but from a deep understanding that you cannot afford to abandon yourself. To know yourself also means having the courage to face your imperfections, to acknowledge your limits not as an excuse, but as a way to allocate your energy wisely, To recognize your wounds, not to wallow, but to stop living from them. To understand what cuts you deeply, not to assign blame, but to protect what remains whole. Those who lack self-knowledge often live under the illusion that they can have it all and then lose it all because they didn't know what was truly worth holding on to. They try to please everyone, only to become someone who no longer knows who they're trying to please. They set too many goals, chase too many things, never realizing they're losing themselves in a race that has no finish line. But the self-aware don't need to have all the answers. They only need to know which questions are worth chasing. They know when to pause and when to move, not because someone tells them, but because they feel the signal from within. They're not perfect, but they are grounded. They are not wooed, but they are deep, and they don't waver easily, because every action is anchored in something real, something unshakable. A sustainable strategy isn't a 10-year plan with rigid milestones. It's a way of living where even the smallest choices reflect your truest self. It's when you turn down a great opportunity because it doesn't align with your values. It's when you accept being slower than others but know you're on the right path. It's when you understand yourself deeply enough that you no longer need to prove yourself and therefore avoid being pulled into games that aren't worth playing. Self-knowledge doesn't make life easier, but it makes life clearer. And in a world clouded with confusion, clarity is a rare kind of power. It helps you stay oriented. It helps you know when to stop. Most importantly, it helps you protect the king, the deepest, most essential part of who you are, keeping it safe from rash decisions made by someone who hasn't yet understood their own game. Because if you don't know what you're defending, you won't know what you're fighting for. And if you're not truly fighting for the deepest part of yourself, then even victory, if it comes, will be nothing more than an empty shell dressed in applause. Of all the forces that can hold us back, it's not the outside world. It's not our competitors. It's not our circumstances. It's the quietest force of all the whispers inside our own minds, soft, subtle, but relentless. These voices don't scream, they don't knock, they whisper in the most familiar voice of all your own. You're not good enough, you'll fail eventually. They'll never accept someone like you. Stop dreaming, be realistic. These phrases don't come from others. No one has to say them out loud because we've said them to ourselves so many times they've become part of us, and that's what makes them so dangerous. They don't sound like an enemy. They sound like a companion. Real leadership, whether it's leading a life, an organization, or yourself, doesn't begin with commanding others. It begins with turning inward and facing the quiet rebellion happening inside your own mind. It starts with being brave enough to name those destructive voices. To ask yourself, is this really me? Or just a programmed echo of old fear? It's easy to assume those thoughts are the truth because they're so familiar, so frequent, so logical. But familiar doesn't mean true, and repetition doesn't mean reality. Many people live their entire lives following a script. They never wrote just because they believed the voice in their head instead of recognizing it for what it is. An echo of past wounds, unhealed fear, and borrowed doubt. That's why the first and most important task for anyone who wants to live with clarity and intention is this: become the leader of your own mind, not by suppressing or denying the negative thoughts, but by changing the conversation. That means learning to talk to yourself differently. Instead of, I can't do this, try, I can't do this yet, but I'm learning. Instead of, I'm not as good as them, say, I'm becoming better than I was yesterday. Instead of, what if I fail, to ask, what if I never try? This isn't about fake positivity, it's about mental redirection. It's about giving yourself a new language, a clearer, more honest, more compassionate lens through which to see your life. And when your inner language changes, your outer world follows. Because every action you take, Every decision you make is built on the material of your thoughts. If the foundation is fear, your life will always feel fragile. But if the foundation is trust in yourself and the journey, then you will live like someone with deep roots. No matter how fierce the storm, no one is immune to the whispers. But here's the difference, true. Leaders don't let them drive. They know when a thought is a necessary warning, and when it's just an old wound trying to speak. They don't fight their minds. They befriend, train, and guide them. Imagine you are the gatekeeper of your mental kingdom. Every thought that knocks, you get to decide whether to let it in or leave it outside. Not through force, but through awareness, because you understand not every thought deserves to become a belief, and not every belief deserves to stay forever. In the end, what matters most is not whether you hear the whispers, but whether you still believe them. Are you letting them continue writing your story? Or are you learning how to rewrite the script? Because in the chess game of life, if the king within you is defeated by those whispers, then the game ends before you ever get to truly play. But if you learn how to change the inner dialogue, if you learn how to sit with yourself and speak the truth, then you don't just survive, you lead. We live in a world where power is often measured by volume. Who speaks the loudest, shows up the most, gets the most attention. But the truth is, the loudest things are rarely the deepest. Meanwhile, the kind of power that's quiet, steady, and often overlooked is clarity. Clarity isn't knowing everything. It's knowing who you are, what you're doing, and why you're doing it. When you have clarity, you don't need to prove yourself. You don't need to seek approval. You're not easily shaken. You become unpredictable, not because you're playing games, but because you no longer fit into the usual formulas society imposes on everyone else. Because no matter how advanced society becomes, it still knows how to manipulate those who are unsure of themselves. It offers definitions of success, happiness, and human worth, and invites you into the race. Without inner roots, you're easily swept up in it. You begin to believe you must have status recognition or something to be admired for in order to be worthy. And so you join the game where the ego is fed by applause and self-worth, becomes as volatile as the stock market, up with praise, down with criticism. You buy more, do more, speak more, not because you truly need to, but because you're terrified of feeling like you're falling behind. But in the end, you're fighting a battle where the prize is an elegantly packaged emptiness. The person with clarity doesn't fight that way anymore. They don't reject society, but they're not ruled by it. They can walk into a crowd without becoming lost in it. They can interact with fame, money, criticism, or compliments because they know exactly where they stand within it all. They don't need to say, "I need nothing." They simply look around and say, "I know what is enough." Clarity gives you the ability to see through illusion. When others are drawn to appearances, you see intention. When others react impulsively, you observe patiently. When others fear loss, you remain calm through the shift. Not because you don't care, but because you are rooted. You don't cling to what's outside you because you've found your center within. And when you live from that center, you become unshakable. Not because you're rebellious, but because you can no longer be controlled by fear, desire, or someone else's expectations. You can collaborate without being dependent. You can listen without being blindly led. You can evolve without losing who you are. Clarity is a quiet kind of strength. It doesn't shout. It doesn't compete. But those who have it carry a natural influence. Not because they seek to be followed, but because their words come from somewhere real. Their actions carry weight, not because of titles or authority, but because people feel it, they are living the truth. Today's world isn't short on intelligence. It's not short on high achievers. What it lacks is clarity. People who can pause in the rush of life and ask, "What do I truly want?" People who dare to slow down to turn down great opportunities because they don't align with their inner compass. People who take a different road even when everyone else is heading the same way because they refuse to play a game. They didn't write, real power doesn't lie in how many people obey you. It lies in whether you're truly being yourself every day. Can you stay clear when everything else becomes blurry? Can you stand in the storm without tipping over because you know exactly where your roots are? Clarity is not a light that shines from outside. It's a steady flame within, quiet but enduring. And that light, even when faint, is enough to show you the way, even when no one else can see it. In modern life, where everything moves faster than we can breathe, where the news changes by the minute, where social media defines value by the number of likes, there exists an unspoken but unmistakable divide: the reactors and the decision makers. A reactor is someone who lets the external world write their life script. They wake up each day and are immediately swept into the current of the world. News, emails, invitations, deadlines, other people's expectations. They react to whatever is happening, like a small boat tossed by waves drifting wherever the wind blows. Not because they're weak, but because they've never truly stopped to ask, what am I actually living for? If you don't set your own purpose, the world will set one for you. It will fill your mind with noise, outside standards, and endless comparisons. You may look like you're living a full life, but in reality, you're living on borrowed dreams, borrowed goals from others, borrowed desires from social media, borrowed definitions of success from society. And one day you'll ask yourself, who am I in all of this? And you might not have a clear answer. In contrast, a decision maker lives differently. They don't let their life be swept along. They intentionally design their path, not by controlling everything, but by curating what deserves space in their mind. They know what truly matters and they say no to the rest. Not out of pride, but out of clarity. They start each day not by reacting, but by reconnecting with themselves. No need to meditate for hours or escape modern life. Just one honest question: what truly matters to me today? And from that clarity they live, not rushed, not impulsive. Every decision is an extension of their core, not a reflex to outside pressure. The difference between a reactor and a decision maker isn't about skill, it's about foundation. The reactor lives from the outside in, waiting for the world to define them. The decision maker lives from the inside out, shaping the world through their presence. Well, one is easily swayed, the other carries internal gravity. One is pushed by emotional tides, the other is a still rock in the storm. Here's the paradox. Many believe success means being better than others, climbing higher, achieving more. But the deepest kind of success, it's not losing your essence in a game someone else designed. Winning a chess game doesn't count if you had to sacrifice your truth to get there. If you had to wear a mask, speak words you don't believe, live days stripped of genuine feeling, then no matter how many awards you've earned, you're still losing from the inside out. And so the decision maker chooses a different path. They may move slower, they may not stand out in a crowd, but they remain themselves. They know when to speak and when to stay silent. They don't live to prove, they live to be present. Every action, every relationship, every word, they align with who they really are. You can feel this presence in someone, not through what they boast, but in the quiet strength you sense when you're near them. They don't need to shout to be heard. They don't need much to feel enough. They are simply themselves, clear, unpretentious. And that in itself is freedom. In the end, the real question isn't how much are you winning, it's whose game are you winning? If it's not your own, every victory is temporary. But if you're living and deciding from the center of your being, then even if you lose something, You're never the one who's lost, because the true winner isn't the one who gets there the fastest, it's the one who never lets go of themselves along the way. The mind at its core is like a piece of soil. It doesn't discriminate, it doesn't resist. It simply does what it's meant to do, nurture whatever seeds you plant in it. If you sow clarity, awareness, and compassion, it will blossom into peace. But if you plant confusion, self-doubt, comparison, and anxiety, it will bear fruit as well. Only this time they'll be bitter. What's frightening is this: most of us don't consciously tend to that soil. We allow news, social media, other people's words, invisible expectations to scatter hundreds of seeds into it every single day without realizing it. Then one day we wake up and ask, why am I always anxious? Why do I feel exhausted even when nothing is lacking? And the answer is simple: because a forest has grown inside your mind, one that doesn't even belong to you. Balance truly is not about standing still in a spinning world. It's about returning to your center whenever you get pulled away. It's about tending to three core elements: your mind, your values, and your purpose. Without one of these, you might survive, but you won't fully live. The mind is where it all begins. If it's chaotic, then even with the perfect plan, natural talent, or ideal environment, you'll still find ways to sabotage yourself from within. A person with a clear mind can see a path through the chaos. A person clouded by anxiety, fear, or pressure can lose their way, even in full daylight. Values are your inner spine. They keep you standing tall when everything else starts to shake. When you know what is non-negotiable, you can't be swayed by praise, temptation, or shortcuts. You might bend, you might change direction, but you won't trade away your essence. Values aren't what you declare, they're what you're willing to protect even when no one's watching. And finally, purpose. It doesn't have to be grand. It doesn't have to change the world. Your purpose just needs to be true enough to keep you going on days when no one's cheering, strong enough to help you rise when you fall. When you have a purpose, everything you do has direction. You don't need to sprint. You just need to keep stepping. You don't need to be loud. You just need to stay steady. And each small action repeated with intention becomes the living proof of a life with meaning. But if you lose that center, if you lose your connection to your mind, your values, and your purpose, then even if everything looks fine on the outside, a good job, plenty of friends, an impressive social media feed inside, you might already be crumbling. You might still laugh, still meet every responsibility, but deep down, some part of you is going quiet, fading, disappearing. So balance is not a fixed state, it's a daily practice. It's returning again and again to clear the weeds from your mind. It's allowing each decision to be lit by the lamp of your values, not the flicker of impulse. It's placing each action in the current of your purpose, so your energy doesn't get wasted on things that mean nothing. The one who holds balance is the one who can remain standing in life without losing themselves. They don't need to be extraordinary. They don't need to outshine anyone. They just need to be themselves, whole, grounded, and steady like an old tree. No matter how strong the winds blow, its roots grip deep into the earth, and it's because of that quiet strength others come to them. Not because they seek to lead, but because that stillness says one simple thing: you can be like this too. After all the insights, reflections, and awakenings, one truth remains. What matters most is action. Not action to prove something, not action to compete, but action as a way to tend to the inner kingdom. The place where your truth lives, where your essence resides, stripped of all roles and expectations. The world will always try to pull you outward: deadlines, social media, other people's expectations, temptations disguised as glittering opportunities. And if your center isn't strong, you'll be swept away. Not because you're not capable, but because you've forgotten what's worth holding on to and what you can let go. That's why the first step in any sustainable life strategy isn't to ask, what should I do? It's to pause and ask, what is essential that I must protect at all costs? Maybe it's clarity. Maybe it's self-respect. Maybe it's a genuine relationship. Maybe it's a value you can't compromise. Maybe it's your inner freedom, the ability not to be manipulated by fear or scarcity. Whatever it is, you need to name it clearly, honestly, because if you don't know what you're fighting for, you'll trade yourself away for things that don't matter. Once you're clear on what needs protecting, every action you take becomes intentional. You don't need to change the whole world. You only need to change how you wake up each morning. Instead of grabbing your phone, pause, take a deep breath. Remember what you're protecting. Remind yourself that today you will live from that place, whether in work, in conversation, or in rest. You don't have to become superhuman. You just need to create small moments where you're truly present, where your words carry no hidden defenses, where your steps aren't driven by fear of missing out, where your eyes pause to truly see the people you care about. These small acts may seem simple, but they are the walls that protect the inner kingdom. Every time you say no to something that violates your values, you strengthen that castle. Every time you listen to yourself before the noise of the world, you thicken its walls. Every time you choose to act with intention rather than habit, you become unshakable, not because you're stronger than others, but because you're no longer so easily moved from within. The world may knock you down, but it cannot defeat you if you still have a place to rise from, and that place is within you. That kingdom doesn't need applause. It doesn't need to be displayed. But if you care for it daily with conscious actions and wise decisions, even when no one is watching, then you are living like a true leader, leading yourself moment by moment. And in the end, don't worry if you don't have it all figured out. Don't be afraid if you sometimes lose your way. What matters isn't whether you make mistakes. It's whether you know how to return to your center. Every step you take back, even the tiniest one, is a victory. Not on someone else's board, but on the real chessboard, the one where you are the rule maker, the king, and the one who chooses how the story ends. Conclusion. The real game of chess, in the chessboard of life, no one escapes the hard positions. There will be moments when you're cornered, when you lose pieces, when you fall behind. There will be days when you doubt yourself, when giving up seems easier, when you question if it's all even worth it. But remember this. The greatest victory isn't checkmating your opponent. It's not losing yourself in the process. No one else can live your life for you. No one else can protect your inner king except you. And that king doesn't need to shout, doesn't need to perform. It needs only one thing to never fall in your own mind. My king doesn't give up. It's not just a phrase. It's a commitment, a way of living, a silent vow you make to yourself. Play the game of life, not with haste, not with a hunger to outshine, but with deep strategy, intentional stillness, and a purpose that is clear and true. Every move, no matter how small, carries weight. Every choice, even in silence, is a move placed on the board, not to defeat others, but to conquer the weaker parts of yourself. And when the noise fades, when the masks fall, if you've still held on to your truth, if you've still walked in alignment with what you believe, if your heart remains intact, then you have won. Not because you defeated anyone else, but because you never surrendered yourself.